South Park is stuck in a time loop of cosmic proportions, and it's all because of Kenny. To prove this, I've rewatched every episode that involves Kenny's death, and believe me, there were a lot of episodes. To understand this theory, we need to know who Kenny is and what his character represents in the world of South Park. Kenneth Kenny McCormick is a sweetie, which is why it's so funny that he dies, brutally, a lot. But there's a reason for those deaths. Like other adult animations, South Park's early episodes relied on a format similar to a sitcom. The characters exist in a certain state. That state is disrupted by the plot of the episode, and the resolution of the plot returns when the characters are in their original state. South Park first aired in 1997, and the format has been played out time and time again by shows like The Simpsons, Friends, and Seinfeld. It's likely that Kenny's immortality was originally a parody of the format itself, poking fun at the politeness of any growth or suffering that a sitcom character goes through. It also gave the impression that South Park totally rejected the idea of continuity. This was a red herring. Though Kenny's death seemed to have started as just a running gag, throughout the show, Matt Stone and Trey Parker have carefully crafted bits of lore and hints that suggest Kenny's role is not just a punching bag for them to kill. He's actually the entire reason that South Park can keep existing. People began to get curious about the real source of Kenny's immortality in about 2010, when Season 14 dropped. In Season 14, there are a trilogy of episodes which have come under the completely unhinged subheading of Coon and Friends. The episodes are a parody of superhero movies, with all the kids dressing up as superheroes and trying to save the world. Season 14, Episode 12 is called Mysterion Rises, in which Kenny's superhero Batman-type alter ego, Mysterion, tells his friends explicitly that he is immortal.
I can't die.
He tells them this out of frustration that, while they're all pretending to have superpowers, he actually does have the power of immortality, and none of them ever remembers a single one of his deaths. But more on Mysterion later. At first, it might not seem clear why Kenny has taken this long to break down over all of this. It could have been the case that he'd probably told his friends this before, and they simply forgotten. But the reason he tells them now is because the world is under assault by Cthulhu, the eldritch god from the stories of H.P. Lovecraft, and he has been summoned by a cult that Kenny's parents used to be a part of. But it's not just Kenny's parents that are influenced by this cult. After listening in on the cult meeting, Kenny hears the cult chant the words, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die." This quote draws an interesting link between Kenny and death. In Season 2, Episode 7, Kenny literally kills death. Could Kenny be a part of the strange eons that kill death? After all of this time, is that what it's referring to? Kenny confronts his parents, but they don't remember anything. They only attended the meetings for the free booze.
They just used to offer free beer at their meetings, so we would go.
So then Kenny asks a group of goth kids to explain that passage to him. They explain the myth of Cthulhu from the Necronomicon, which is an actual book you can buy on Amazon if you wanted to. They say that the cult's goal is to bring beings from the Lost City into the real world. The Lost City is a place full of beings like Cthulhu. Flipping through the pages of the Necronomicon, the goths show him a page of the Lost City. And when they explain the cult's attempts to bring one of those beings into the world, they show a page that depicts a baby at the center of a pentagram with cult members praying around it. The implication here is that the cult was attempting to bring a being from the Lost City into the real world by placing it inside of a human baby. Later, when Kenny and the boys are banished to the Lost City by Cthulhu and Cartman, Kenny says,
I don't know, but I feel like I've been here before.
So it seems like Kenny getting his powers from Cthulhu is pretty open and shut case. Now that we have that out of the way, this theory goes deeper. Much deeper. As in, Cthulhu is using Kenny to keep South Park trapped in a time loop. Deeper. So let's start by asking the question, how exactly do Kenny's powers work? Do they really just erase the memories of everyone who sees him die? Now this could be it, but it's possible that Kenny's powers also answer the oldest question in South Park. Why don't any of the characters ever grow up? Kinda like what I was saying before, because of the sitcom format, many long-running animated shows have tried different ways to justify their characters never aging. For example, in recent Simpsons episodes, the creators have shown flashbacks to Homer as a teenager in the 90s, even though the show has been running since like 1989 with an adult Homer. South Park took a different approach, and Kenny is its epicenter. A popular theory about Kenny's powers is actually laid out by a user on Reddit named SoftCoreFace in this Reddit post. In it, they theorize that when Kenny dies, all of the characters in South Park are entirely reset to a previous state, where they are both younger and still believe that Kenny is alive. This would also explain why, throughout the show, the kids seem to age in maturity and the ability to take on adult issues, all while still remaining very young. This is probably another reason why South Park needs Kenny in order to exist. If he wasn't there, then the kids would just grow up and the show would probably end. Okay, now this is a little unrelated, but I do love the way that knowing all of this makes the show even funnier. I mean, for example, let's look at Eric Cartman. Cartman is the only character that remembers Kenny's deaths. In Cartman Land, after Kenny dies on one of Cartman's amusement park rides, Kenny's family demands that Cartman pays restitution.
There's also the lawsuit of the little boy who died in your park. The family's entitled to the rest of this.
To which Cartman explains,
What, Kenny? He dies all the time!
Cartman being the only character that remembers Kenny's deaths is likely explained by the fact that in the episode Succubus, Eric receives an eye transplant from Kenny's severed head. From that episode on, it would make sense that Eric sees things the way that Kenny does. And he never loses his memory, even when his body is reset along with the rest of the town. Let's not forget he also drank Kenny's ashes thinking they were a chocolate mix, and ended up sharing his body with Kenny, but that happens later in Season 6. Cartman's comment about this knowledge of Kenny's constant dying came in at Season 5. This leaves the eye transplant as the most likely because it occurred in Season 3. But then again, when you have time travel, everything is possible because nothing ever makes sense anyways. And I think that makes this show even funnier, because despite losing their memories every time Kenny dies, Stan and Kyle still show that they mature and grow throughout the show, and are able to take on more and more adult issues. But Eric, even with the same knowledge of time that Kenny has, never matures in the absolute slightest. He's still such just a little asshole that even with visions of eternity, he just will not grow up. While that's a pretty funny interpretation, there is an even darker take on exactly how Kenny's Lovecraftian powers have trapped South Park in a time loop. In H.P. Lovecraft's mythology, Cthulhu is inseparable from the concept of madness. Most beings in Lovecraft's mythology cause madness in any character that observes them, but Cthulhu specifically uses madness it causes to control humans. Being a human, Kenny would have had to gone mad at some point with how linked to Cthulhu he is. And if the ritual that originally gave Kenny his powers as a baby was also meant to summon Cthulhu, then we get two more possible explanations for what's going on here. The first explanation is that Kenny's repeated deaths are each a sacrifice to Cthulhu. Him putting himself into dangerous situations, or even suicidal situations, are a result of Cthulhu making him go crazy. If we take this theory to be true, it means that Kenny is just an extension of Cthulhu, meant to keep Cthulhu's influence alive and well on Earth. This would also mean that it is Cthulhu himself keeping South Park locked in this time loop, and using Kenny's death as a reset button of sorts. The second explanation gets even darker than that. Kenny went mad from his connection to Cthulhu long ago, and is now hallucinating all of the strange, unnatural, and chaotic events that we see unfold over the course of South Park. And his brief moments of death are really his moments of lucidity. That would make the most sense, since most of the stuff that happens is total nonsense. It would also support the theory that South Park needs Kenny to even exist, as it's all just a hallucination that he's having. It could also be a pretty hopeless theory, and I don't want to spread hopelessness. Tinder's doing a pretty good job on that front, so I'll leave that to them. But don't worry, there is at least a hopeful take on all of this. Now, assuming that Kenny isn't completely crazy, and that the things we see happen in South Park really do happen,
Oh my god! They killed Kenny! You bastard!
then Kenny quickly takes on the role of a savior. For example, Kenny is shown to objectively be the best defender of good in South Park. In Season 9, Episode 4, Best Friends Forever, Kenny's death plays a pivotal role in the battle between good and evil. The episode shows Kenny getting into a game on his PSP called Heaven vs. Hell. When he dies after getting hit by an ice cream truck, literal angels from heaven tell him that the game was a test to find the best person to lead the army of heaven into battle with Satan. This again supports the theory that Kenny's death are actually needed for South Park to continue. If Kenny hadn't been there, heaven would have fallen, and without his ability to come back to life, South Park would have ended immediately after his death. But it's not just Kenny's purpose in heaven that we need to talk about here. Now, while there are several instances of Kenny using his powers for good, even at the expense of terrible suffering every single time he dies, the real purpose of his power seems to come in the forefront in Coon and Friends. Now, back to the topic of Mysterion, where we see Kenny with his jacket off and mask on, taking on a gravely Batman-like voice. He is mysterious, tough, and a badass. When a hero-turned-villain from a previous episode named Captain Hindsight holds the boys at gunpoint and demands they give him photos they've been using to blackmail him, this motherfucker Kenny puts the gun to his head and says, "Pull the trigger, you pussy." Captain Hindsight backs down. Throughout the episode, Kenny continually uses his immortality as a way to fight evil and save his friends. When Cartman makes Cthulhu banish Kenny and the boys to the Lost City, Kenny is able to return to the real world by impaling himself on a spike, thus dying. The writers made a point to make Kenny's death especially painful in this scene, with him alive and screaming in agony for a couple seconds before he dies. This was probably done to just show how painful these sacrifices are for Kenny, and how much suffering Kenny goes through by being trapped in this time loop. It's like if Jesus had to get crucified constantly for 26 seasons of the show, and instead of people praying to him, they just laughed at him. These sacrifices also once again reinforce this theory. Kenny has to die for the time loop to work, and to be able to save his friends. I also want to note that the entire vibe of this Mysterion character is just so perfect. It makes sense that he's dark and angry all the time. It's a side of Kenny we rarely see, but it is 100% justifiable. It feels like an actual hero that would exist. I mean, Doctor Strange kinda did this whole thing with Dormammu when he trapped him in that infinite time loop of one moment and then just kinda destined himself to constantly die in awful ways over and over again. The difference is that Dormammu gave up pretty quickly and released Doctor Strange, but Trey Parker and Matt Stone will never let Kenny be free. The character Mysterion also serves as a way to reflect what's been going on inside of the mostly mute character of Kenny. He's clearly been going through it for a long time, and we, the audience, never really understood his approach to life. Until Mysterion. Mysterion solidifies the idea that Kenny, in his day-to-day life, is resigned to his destiny to always suffer and never really die or find peace. But Mysterion's, and Kenny's, real strength is the fact that they use this curse of immortality and looping time to the benefit of others. There's one more topic I'd like to explore though. In Best Friends Forever, a lawyer reads Kenny's will after he's passed. Kenny's will begins with him saying, "In the highly likely event of my death, I, Kenny McCormick, wish to leave all of my belongings to my good friends, Stan and Kyle." This shows that not only is Kenny aware of his situation, but he has accepted it and is always trying to make the best out of it. Kenny is a very heroic character. Now, with all of this being said, what exactly is the meaning of it? Does Kenny represent something in the real world? Well, to me, I think it's pretty clear that Kenny represents a resilience, a hope, a strength of the human spirit in the face of constant adversity, even when faced with a universe as meaningless as the one in South Park. But there's still one more piece to complete the puzzle. In an interview in 2000, Trey Parker said that he and Matt Stone based the character of Kenny off of an actual old childhood friend who was also named Kenny. Trey Parker explains that Kenny was the poorest kid in school and that he would often not make it to class. Trey and Matt would joke by saying,
They killed Kenny!
Only for Kenny to show up the next day. Real life Kenny probably had to deal with many things that children of the lower class go through. Often a child from a poor household will miss class to take care of siblings while their parents are off at work, do extra chores needed to be done around the house, or even have a job of their own. If this was the case for the real child that Kenny was based on, then it would follow that when Kenny dies in the show, it's a really good metaphor for the constant struggles that children of low-income houses have to face. But the metaphor goes even further than that. In the Coon and Friends trilogy, the main antagonist is Cthulhu. After the BP oil spill, which happened in real life and destroyed a massive amount of sea life, the BP oil company in the show gives several pathetic apologies, like the BP in real life did, and goes on to drill into the moon. This awakens the ancient Eldritch god Cthulhu. Cthulhu then goes on to destroy the world with Cartman directing him. Cthulhu is meant to represent the consequences of a large organization having no accountability for their actions. Cthulhu and its cult members kill Kenny multiple times throughout the trilogy, but Kenny continues to come back and fight another day as Mysterion. It's hard to say that Kenny's story is one of triumph. He never really wins, and is always going to be doomed to constantly suffer at the hands of Trey Parker and Matt Stone's parodies of real-world events. But Kenny's real victory is in the inspiration he gives us, the viewers, to continue fighting for what we believe is right, and to keep getting back up when we get beat down. Because it's not about how many times you get knocked down, it's about how many times you get back up. And at the end of the day, this is all just a theory. And there are tons of other arguments that you can make against it. One, for instance, would be the very correct argument that this is all just absolutely ridiculous. Why should having Kenny's eyes affect Cartman's memory? How could Trey and Matt have known their plans for Kenny's immortality lore 14 seasons ahead of time? And above all, isn't South Park just a dumb show that makes fun of present-day issues? Now, it's probably not the case that everything I've laid out in this video were their true intentions. But South Park, like all media, is an art. And art is open to 100 different interpretations. And as our understanding of the world changes, it can make us see old pieces of media in a new way. South Park is a complex show with a lot of moving parts and characters. And over time, patterns in these characters might reveal deeper meanings than what the creators may have originally intended. And Kenny is one of those characters that might have just begun as a gag, but has taken on more and more meaning as the show has gone on. And I, for one, think that Kenny has become a really interesting guy. And he carries with him strange eons in which even death may die.